She wasn't the victim. The victim was the 5-year-old black child that she racially abused and the adult black person she racially abused. We should all be able to say, yes, that is what happened there. There's no equivalence. There's no ambiguity. There's no, you know what, maybe this story, No, let's just have a clear line in the sand and say, that is wrong. That is racism. End. Surely?
No.
All right, Stephen Crowder, you're giving it to me. I think I'm the innocent pawn in the whole saga here. I'm just the one sitting here listening to a very, very unpleasant young white woman being deliberately racist, unashamedly racist, wants us to think she's a racist, admits to being racist. And when you talk about context of using the N-word, she is using it in that context. She had no problem with it being used by Shiloh Hendricks. She has no problem with saying it. And my only point in challenging her to say it on air was, well, go on then. If you're going to be that brazen, let's see if you're actually prepared to do it. And it turned out she wasn't. Over to you.
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Piers. I do appreciate it. And I want to be really clear about one thing. At no point in this conversation am I implying, insinuating in any way that you are racist, because I know how much of a powder keg this can be. Two white people, in our case, especially with you, two very white people discussing this topic. Look, the point that I was making, and I believe I said low down dirty trick. I don't think I just said disingenuous. And it's not about you with that specific person. It's about say the N-word. Say the N-word. And we've seen this used quite a bit. And the issue that I have here is I don't want to live in a society. Now, I'm not super familiar with this lady, okay? If you say she's a racist, I'll take your word for it.
Well, she admitted it. She admitted it.
Okay. But we live in a society where right now the racism issue and words are being thrown down as landmines, as someone is walking in reverse. And you can look at, for example, I think we're all adults, context, and the level of affront, which is what I was addressing there with Dr. Marc Lamont Hill, who's been very much a gentleman with me. And I'll determine the level of authenticity as to that offense. I think we're adults and we can have context. I don't think that there are boogeyman words. I think context matters more. I think that we as a society right now are canceling livelihoods over someone saying a word and permitting reprehensible behavior in the form of crime, in the form of the protests that we have seen in the last recent years. And I think I'd like a society where we are hard on actions and forgiving on words, and certainly in the context of adulthood, able to understand it. Let's say Kanye West's recent single, right? That's a problem. It's offensive. I think we would both agree that it's borderline, at least anti-Semitic. Would we agree on that?
I think that a guy who has spent the last year is bestowing the virtues of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, who's been selling swastika. But I think it's an important clarification.
Okay, because I agree with you.
I'll tell you why. Because he would argue that the actual words of the record are not anti-Semitic. Right, and it's sure. Hard, but the fact he's got millions of people running around chanting Heil Hitler clearly, to me, is an extreme form of anti-Semitism by a man who knows what he's doing.
I agree with you. Okay, I just wanted a yes or no because I wanted to get to the point. But I agree with you.
It's complicated simply because
that complicated. It's
complicated because the actual lyrics, he would argue, are not anti-Semitic. He's trying to be clever, and I don't think we should give him the pass.
Okay, I agree. I'm trying to create a really, really blatant, obvious analogy here to make a point. So we both agree that it's anti-Semitic. I think it's bad. I think saying Hail Hitler is bad. Okay. That is not, however, a violation in any way. Your First Amendment protects it. Now, saying I would like to, I am calling you to enact what Hitler has enacted, that's a call to action. Defamation requires damages. And I want to get to this because this does matter. Okay. When we're talking about this new song, and as a comedian and as a linguist, I'm going to say the word here so that everybody knows, and that's what you're going to clip. We're looking at words that are offensive, a song that is offensive, but one is a boogeyman word. We have one noun, a verb, and a noun. Okay, we have a noun by itself, contextually. That's bad. Shouldn't say it, but it's not imbued with any power outside of historical context. The last noun, Hitler, is imbued with the power of the verb that precedes it. Hail, to praise, to venerate. That'll get clipped, even though I'm condemning the song as anti-Semitic, and not one person here who would be the victim of a more severe call to action is going to say it's anti-Semitic. I think we're in a silly point in this country when we're pulling this clip to condemn the anti-Semitism here at the studio, and people going, hey, can I get a second cut of that N-word, Hail Hitler? That's the point. It's not genuine.
Would you have used the N-word in the way that you just did if you had a black guest with you?
Like Dr. Hill? Sure.
You would?
Sure.
So what about Shiloh Hendricks, who is caught on camera repeatedly using the N-word, says it to a 5-year-old kid, right? And is now getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even millions now, I haven't checked, in charity donations backing her. Do you support what she did on that bit of footage?
I don't think that someone should scream the N-word at a child any more than I think a grown adult should call a child a piece of shit. Now, I do think that if you're talking about the money raised, we are now dealing with the reaction and not with the action that has led to it. But today, when you look at this, this is a reaction to white people, and this is important. And if you want to know what the reaction is, look at Gen Z voting males, in particular Hispanic males, who we've been told, including by Dr. Hill, should be natural allies of the black community. When you're a white person in this country and it's, hey, you don't know the lived experience, but I know yours. When it's, hey, if you move into an area, that's gentrification. But if you leave, it's white flight. It's, hey, sit down and shut up, and then it's silence is violence. It's, hey, you can't use empirical in making an argument about neighborhoods regarding crime data, but you also can't say you have a black friend, which, by the way, is a completely legitimate defense against racism. The only way to win is not to play, and so people aren't even talking. And I want to make one last point. I do a segment on this show called Black and White and the Gray Issues, where I will, as Dr. Hill does, go into barbershops, go into black neighborhoods, and discuss these issues with them. And not once has anyone accused me of a whiff of racism. What white people are afraid of in this country, and the reason they're not having a dialogue, is the game of telephone and someone in the media telling a community that they should be experiencing an affront. And that leads to more racial division.
She wasn't the victim. The victim was the 5-year-old black child that she racially abused, and the adult black person she racially abused. We should all be able to say, yes, that is what happened there. There's no equivalence. There's no ambiguity. There's no, you know what, maybe this story. No, let's just have a clear line in the sand and say, that is wrong. That is racism. End. Surely?
No. Now, do you want to know which part I disagree with?
Yes.
Certainly not the part that I already agreed with. Shouldn't yell the N-word at a black person 5 years old or 50 years old. But the reason for the GoFundMe amount, you can simply dismiss it and say those people are racist. Or I am telling you that you are seeing a statistical reality emerge where, by and large, the rejection of countries like where you and I are from, the policing of speech, and the out-of-context use of boogeyman words to try and destroy people's livelihoods, where white people are going, yeah. The conversation, though, isn't that you shouldn't do that. We all know that. The conversation is, I can lose my job if I sing along to my favorite hip-hop album, whether Enter the Wu-Tang or Kanye's College Dropout.
Here you are, to me, I say this respectfully, sounding like a paid-up member of the woke right. But there's no equivalence between that and what happened in that playground. Because you talk about context. The context of the one in the playground was to be deliberately racist.
Well, the context of the playground was that her child was having another child steal from her child's bag, and she was upset. And again, it still doesn't make it right, but let's also provide some context. The point that I was addressing was you labeling everyone who gave to the Give, Send, Go. By the way, I've also never been labeled woke right. That's very, very silly. $782,000, I believe. Would we also say then that the people giving to Carmelo Anthony, support the wanton stabbing of white kids who die in their twin brother's arms? What I'm saying is there is a reaction to people being told to sit down and shut up and silence is violence, and words being used to end their livelihoods. And that is the conversation that is taking place in this country. And most people are refusing to have it. Of course, you shouldn't yell the N-word at a 5-year-old. You got it. But there's no segment if that's where we end it. Let's discuss why you have tens of thousands of people giving money for something they never would have donated to a mere 10, 15 years ago. And the prescription is more dialogue and doing so in good faith rather than this word whack-a-mole that we're playing in this country.
But in terms of what Stephen said about, this is heading to a dangerous area if you weaponize words generally, is he right?
In the abstract, sure. I mean, I think if you weaponize a bunch of words and people don't have the safe space to say what they want or say what they believe, it could be a very dangerous space, because what I find to be offensive, You may not. What I find to be extreme, you may find to be moderate. What I may see as outside the proverbial Overton window, you may not. And so you never want to get into a place, to use Stephen's language, where we're just doing the linguistic whack-a-mole. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I don't think that's what's at issue here. I think there are a few things. You all said a bunch of interesting ththings that I want to that I want to get at. The first thing is, I guess, to Stephen's initial point about my self-emasculation. At the thought, I wasn't melting down, as some on the right have said, because I was afraid that this boogeyman N-word was going to pop out of her mouth and I was going to fall away. That wasn't the point at all. I think you actually characterized it properly, Piers. I was frustrated not at the looming threat of the N-word coming out of her mouth. It was at the spectacle that I felt like in that moment was being created that was wholly unnecessary. And again, I don't think you were doing it intentionally at my expense, but we're all hosts. There's a moment where you got somebody on the ropes, and we know it's a good moment. We know it's a big moment. And getting a white person to say the N-word, it's like a few good men. It's like, did you order, it's the Jack Nicholson moment, right? If you can get them to do that, that's a big moment. And I get that. I guess my point at the time was, it's not the smoking gun that we think. White people don't lie about using the N-word. They lie about not using the N-word. If she already said, I use the N-word in private. So no one pretends to use the N-word when they don't. So I actually didn't think that we needed that confession out of her. For me, as far as the other point here, I don't accept Stephen's analysis here of the donations to the campaign. Even if he is right that people were donating out of some political reaction to our hypersensitivity as a society, that's the wrong person to do it to. Do it to the person that's getting doxxed because they made a mistake 10 years ago. Do it to the person who rapped the N-word, on Gold Digger, and suddenly it has lost their ability to go to college. There's all kinds of people who we might say, even if we don't agree fully on the context, who we could say, hey, is a better example of the cause.
I also get it. I will say, great, now do stabbing. And I think I know what the answer is going to be. Can we both, if we want to find common ground here, agree that, yeah, we really find ourselves at a weird point in this country when a bunch of people are giving to a lady who yells the N-word at a 5-year-old, and a bunch of people are giving to someone who is famous for no other reason than allegedly stabbing an innocent person? I know that we'll say it's because innocent until proven guilty, but this is the information that we have on both of these scenarios at this point in time. And what I'm discussing is the prescription moving forward. And one final thing. Here's the point that I was making that you didn't show in that clip too, was saying that it's racist for someone to say they would prefer to live in a predominantly white neighborhood, or they would prefer to live in their neighborhood, which is not black, I believe is what they said. And I don't believe it was necessarily her. I believe there was a man on the panel who said that, but you do. And I'm not going to attribute racism in your heart because only 4% of the population where you're placed in Los Angeles is black. I think we need to stop attributing and imbuing hatred, and I think we need to stop empowering them. But we do find ourselves at a point in this country where neither of these give, send, goes would have blown up if it existed 10 years ago. Why? How'd we get here?
Part of the problem is that when people like you and me, and Mark, I'm sure, launch staunch defenses of the right to free speech, the wrong ears take it as the right to be openly racist and all these other things with no accountability. They misunderstand what free speech actually entails. It doesn't mean you're never going to be held accountable for what you say. When Shiloh Hendricks said that she said the N-word, whatever, this was her right to free speech. Yeah, but everybody else has a right to hold you accountable for it. And it's the second part of that equation, which is, I think, important. So, Stephen, your response to my thesis.
Yeah. Yes, I disagree. I think social media is a part of it, but I also don't think that we're dealing with an accountability culture as far as the country. I think we're dealing with a false accountability culture as far as the media and those in the establishment. You have myself, for example, who was demonetized, throttled on YouTube for simply using the term lesbi queer, someone who referred to themselves as a lesbi queer. It was a quote. Then moved over to Rumble, and after the exodus, Diageo, in charge of 80% of the world's advertising, told Rumble that it wasn't enough to demonetize myself, but that they wouldn't spend $1 of advertising on the entire platform, an alternative platform to YouTube, unless I was removed. You've had entire governments try and remove platforms for freedom of speech. This is not the accountability that people in the streets are calling for. What is being called for example, from people in the media, is a lie. They would rather hear a lie than the truth. And so you have people checking out.
When you talk about context, I think we have to look at context in the context even of these GoFundMes, right? The people who are funding Carmelo Anthony, you can tell this from the comments, this isn't my guess, they're not saying good job. They're saying, we don't believe that you're guilty. We don't believe that you've gotten a fair legal process. And so we're sending money to make sure that you get a proper legal defense because we don't believe that you are guilty of this crime.
I think the
Stabbing is worse than a word.
I think the intentions on both sides are actually malevolent and wrong. They're not doing it out of any great sense of social justice or anything. They're doing it because they're taking a side based on skin color in both those stories, I think. So I think...
murder is worse than yelling.
Yeah, listen.
I think.
Allegedly stabbing someone to death is worse than
getting
using
legally
an ugly
railroaded
word.
is a worse outcome than getting held accountable for using the N-word.
Yeah, but
it's all about the framing.
But Stephen's point is the one is worse
I
than the
don't
other.
think we can end this on this, Pierce. I can take 30 seconds here. If we're
Right,
talking about
right,
accountability,
but
like I said, there's false
we're pretending.
accountability.
So
are you against catch and release?
That
Are you
framing
against
suggests
no
that the
cash
money
bail?
is going for the
Are you against
behavior.
the discount under $1,000 or less where a shopkeeper has to close down because of the name of systemic restorative justice? Are you against cash and release? Are you against cash bail? Are you against the idea that people can shoplift and not be held accountable for their actions? Let's talk real accountability for actions and not false accountability for words. I believe that stabbing someone is worse than saying a word. Both are bad. Me, Mr. Traditional.
You know what?
Okay.
Let
me respond to that. Let me respond to that.
Quickly.
Because again, that is a disingenuous framing. No one is arguing that stabbing someone is better than using the word. My point is our response as a community to the stabbing is not to say, great job. Our response is, this was awful, but let's find out what really happened. No one is saying on the other side of this issue that N-word thing is awful, but let's hold this woman accountable, but let's not go too far. And if they are, I'm okay with that. But it's not apples and oranges. No one is saying what that woman did is worse than that kid getting stabbed. They're saying that the story of the stabbing hasn't been told well or properly, and we want justice for everybody. And
Gentlemen,
to answer your cash bail, yes, I'm against cash bail.
Gentlemen,
but I don't believe I don't believe that's the only way to hold people accountable. You can hold people accountable without cash bail.
Hey, do you like what you saw? I don't know how because it's on YouTube and we have to cut all the good parts out. So you should tune in live weekdays at 11 a.m. Eastern on Rumble. We can still speak freely and even use words like and get and whoa. You've been here this whole time?
Yeah. Snuck in.